Israeli objections may not be the biggest issue facing the Obama administration. It has to convince some skeptics in Congress not to take action until a deal is done. I spoke about an hour ago with White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest about the challenge from Capitol Hill. Josh, let's start with what say Congress should have on any final deal with Iran. Should they have the right to accept or reject a deal of this magnitude?
Well, Stephanie, what we have said about Congress is that they've played a critical role in this effort from the beginning. And what we have said throughout this process is that we've kept Congress in the loop in terms of these ongoing negotiations. And at some point, it will be the responsibility of Congress, after Iran has demonstrated over the long term a willingness to comply with the terms of the agreement, it'll be the responsibility of Congress to ultimately decide whether or not those sanctions should be removed. But we do not believe that Congress should take a vote to remove those sanctions anytime in the near future. And that, frankly, is because we want to see Iran demonstrate some sustained commitment to living up to the terms of the agreement before we dismantle the architecture of the sanctions that have actually forced Iran to the negotiating table in the first place.
But should Congress at least have the opportunity to review the final deal and sign off on it before it's final?
Well, for decades, well, actually even longer than that, for generations, United States presidents, as described in the Constitution, are responsible for advancing the foreign policy interests of the United States. This falls cleanly in line with the way that previous presidents have conducted foreign policy.
You talked about the powers of previous presidents in foreign policy, and I'm reminded of Reagan's old trust but verify advice during the Cold War. Why should the U.S. trust Iran now, if, as the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog agency, has said, they have been caught building secret facilities in the past, and they've never fully explained why?
Well, Stephanie, I'll just be blunt with you. We don't trust Iran, and we shouldn't. As you point out, Iran, for decades now, has sought to try to undermine or evade the work of international inspectors. That's why our approach to these negotiations has been to distrust and verify. And that's why in the context of this agreement, we see the most intrusive, stringent sanctions that have ever been put in place against a country's nuclear program. And these are sanctions that don't just apply to Iran's nuclear facilities. These actually apply to the uranium mines inside of Iran to evaluate sort of mining work is underway there. This would apply to manufacturing facilities that produce centrifuges that actually are included in Iran's nuclear facilities to make sure that they are not building a covert program. It would also include regular access to the nuclear facilities that Iran already has. And this is why we can be sure that from beginning to end, we can have a very detailed understanding of exactly what Iran's nuclear program looks like and ensure that it is not being used to build a nuclear weapon, that it's only being used for peaceful purposes.
When it comes to sanctions, would you just clarify how the lifting of sanctions will work? Has that been worked out? Will they be gradually lifted, or, as Foreign Minister Zarif tweeted out yesterday, will the U.S. sanctions simply cease?
The president was very clear about this yesterday, Stephanie. The president was clear that what we envision is a phased relaxing of sanctions. And it goes back to my answer to your previous question. We need to see Iran demonstrate a sustained commitment to living up to the terms of this agreement before we take away the sanctions.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has said this deal would pose a grave danger to the region and to the world. And Josh, as you know, critics of the agreement say this will only empower Iran, which, besides threatening Israel, is backing rebels in Yemen. It's propping up Syria's Bashar al-Assad. How does this agreement with Iran fit into the president's larger strategy in the Middle East?
The fact is, we continue to have a long list of concerns with Iran and their behavior. As you point out, they have a record of supporting terrorist organizations around the globe. They support destabilizing influences like Hezbollah inside the region. They menace our closest ally in the Middle East, Israel. And in fact, they're even unjustly detaining some American citizens inside of Iran. So we have a long list of concerns, but that's all the more reason we need to make sure that Iran doesn't obtain a nuclear weapon. They're only going to be worse actors if they're nuclear armed.
But isn't that also the reason that our allies like Israel, like Saudi Arabia, are so concerned about this deal? And is this deal worth risking damaging relations further with Israel?
Well, listen, Stephanie, the United States and Israel have an unshakable relationship and an unshakable commitment to our mutual security.